Mr. Vishal Kapoor. Finally, Mr. Dev Shastri.
This is not, I'm not here to make a presentation on NSDC, right? I'm really here to share a kind of a concept of private investments in vocational education space. So the estimates are that the vocational training space, right, is a 1 lakh crore business in the country today. I'm not talking of will be, is. Very interestingly, there are 3 types of delivery models which are in the one is just pure private sector play in terms of getting people, training people, both direct B2C and B2B. So there are a lot of people who come, for example, NIIT or Aptech to do both B2B and B2C. There are a lot of others, right? And this is not dependent on any government funds, not dependent on any government programs. It's pure play private sector. And over the past 3 to 4 years, the range of industries are moving beyond the traditional IT, retail, hospitality, into medical, into construction, into more difficult areas. And typically investment in this is really private investment. Some very little venture capital investment in the pure private play in that category. The second is the new startup categories, which are really focusing on either partnering some of the central government programs, including let's say NSDC and the state government programs. What is interesting about this is that there's around 7,000 crores of government funded skill development programs around the country, and that's a low estimate, right? And as things stand, 25% of that has to be really bought in by the private entrepreneur. Without that, you don't have access to that. So there's roughly another 2,000 crores of investment which is kind of required in that space. The third category is, this is where it is a business-led expansion of training capacity. If it's VLCC, Javed Habib, just to give you that, or Taj hotels, or things where the investment is being made by corporates, right? It is estimated that the amount of investment made there is also close to around 2,000 crores. So if you look at the amount of investment being made in this segment, private investment, it's huge. The interesting part is that you're finding investments across, from mobilization to doing assessments, pre-training, right? Training, content assessment, content delivery, certification, post-training hand-holding, and upskilling going forward. So the entire value chain, right, requires investment, and the amount of investments that I talked about earlier, if you were to look at all the, the 6,000 crores, 2,000 crores, the residential, was all in the skilling space. So the content space, the assessment space, the innovation in developing simulators, etc., is all additional areas of investment that are available. There are basically 3 models. One is a private sector model. One is a hybrid model where you do private sector plus government. And the third, there are a whole lot of people who are just intent on delivering programs for the government. They don't look at either the hybrid or the other model. And so that's the opportunity in this space. I think if our estimates were to hold, it's around 12 to 15,000 crore investment potential annually. Okay. The NSDC bit is very, very small. We have just done 318 crores. This year we'll maybe do double that amount. So with that background, I think we have a very interesting panel here. We have a real practitioner on the ground who is leading one part of an organization that is a fairly large training organization. He's wearing the Centrum Learning hat, so the Centrum Learning, he's not the NSDC partner. If he was Work Skills India, he would be the NSDC partner, but he wears that hat too. We also have Tushar Pandey, who is the president and country head of Yes Bank. And they have done a lot of work in this space and looked at different sectors. And very interestingly, when I was meeting him earlier, they done even something on the sports sector, which actually led NSDC to do some work in the sport sector. We have Zahid, who is also a practitioner, and I don't know if he's still the co-chair of the PhD Skills Committee. So, he would bring a different kind of perspective to it. And Vishal, disclaimer, please don't put all my figures, total it up and hold a gun to my head and you say this is the investment thing, because you are really from the capital side of things. So we have that there. And then we have Eoin Hewitt, who are the people side of it, and kind of Neil is there. Neil also, Eoin has done a lot of work for us. They did the infrastructure skill gap study, also presented in London, right? Yeah, we presented in London together, and they said that the infrastructure sector, if we were to invest 500 billion, right? Not the 1 trillion, but the 500 billion in the 12th plan, we would require 103 million people in that sector. So that study was really led by Neil and his team and Eoin Hewitt. So it's good here, and I'll just go by the order of the speakers. Other than Neil, everybody else is speaking, and I just kept this conversation up for the last 7 minutes to get everybody back into the room. And now that they're here, so Shashi, since you're the first off the block, I'll let you start, and then there's just one apology that I'm going to make, and when the clock strikes 3:10, I'm going to be exiting out, but before that, Shushmita will be here, so she'll, Zahid or someone can take over.
Thank you. What is actually spearheaded the whole corporation NSDC in bringing a lot of private players like us onto one body and help them to gain feet and pushing them to fly as high as possible. Thank you, Dilip, for being here. And he excellently summed up, because the investments today in the private space, in the vocational education and training, skilling, is essentially on all the elements of the value chain. While the entire evolution is happening in this country in terms of trying to depart or trying to integrate the formal education and the vocational skilling into one platform and one framework, I think a lot of investments happen from our side in terms of private players to actually build the entire value chain. Let me just be brief and say what it entails for us. Setting up infrastructure on the ground. You see, end of the day, the skilling is something which is called Ustadi. It's all about something to tell how to do with the hands. Right? It's not about what, but it's all about how. So therefore, you have to put in a lot of money on infrastructure, which actually starts, which helps you to build the brick and mortar piece in where the skilling can happen. while we are present currently in more than 125 districts across 10 states in the country, it is a challenge. It is a lot of investment to set up infrastructure. And therefore, various models are evolved in this, where we can actually hire out infrastructure only as far as the brick and mortar is concerned and do the balance work, which is the other parts of the value chain. So one such investment definitely goes on the infrastructure or hiring of the infrastructure, which is significant. Now, as Dilip said, as we move up the value chain, away from the retail and sales and actually move up the skills value chain, this is where a lot of investments and capacity needs to be built in order to really impart slightly mid-level skills. High level still, it's a distance that we go, but at least when we have to reach the mid-level skills in the skill value chain, a lot of investments are required to actually build what we call skill labs, skill laboratories. So that's another investment that goes as a part of an infrastructure which private players like us in this space have to provide for. Once you do that, there's a lot of investment that actually happens from each of us in terms of trying to build the connect with the community. Communities to be skilled are lying all over the place in this vast country like India. What you need is to, how do you build a connect with them? And therefore, a part of the investment goes in actually trying to build communication, information and education to the community, saying that here come skills as a equally, if not, larger pride in what you do than education. So that's a lot of investments that goes on from us. For example, simple things like making films, providing technology support for the guys who go down the ground, actually talk to the communities, a lot of investment that goes on. And third, what we touched upon was the training content and the associated IPR and the instructional design that we built. I can vouch for my organization, which is Centum Learning, which is there in the space for many, many years. So a lot of content, a lot of investment goes into actually building the content around. Piece is basically when you look at skilling slightly away from training, you need to build a lot of how around the content, and therefore the content has to move. It can't be a static content. So a lot of investment goes on in actually making films, putting content into kind of a motion. It's a kinetic content, not a static content. So that's where the investments actually happen. The fourth is the trainers, the skill instructors. Where are we going to get this community from? A lot of investment goes from us. For example, a skill instructor is taken through a 21-day boot camp, a train the trainer camp in our system. So this 21 days actually, at the end of the day, it's called a boot camp because it's run like an army camp. He has no choice. But 21 days is actually put on such a grill that he has to come out as a trainer or he has to fail as a trainer. Because domain knowledge only doesn't help when you're actually delivering something to a set of class. Domain is only one part of the trainer's capability, but the way he delivers and what he delivers and how he delivers and how he relates to the student is absolutely very critical. Most of the training programs can be excellent content, can actually fail at the delivery stage when you have poor skill instructors. So therefore we have a skill instructors guild that we form and we fund and we invest in the progression of the skill instructor. Today, training and skilling is not a very aspiring profession, right? So therefore, if you have to create an aspiration and some kind of a career for the trainer, that's where we use the guild mechanism to actually build him and start and building his own capability, his own career aspirations, move him. So, we have a system where we invest some reward points and we get him to reward and redeem. A lot of things happens around this, which is again an investment. Third is the people development internally. This is a new space. So you need people who actually can understand communities, can actually start mapping aspirations of people, what they want to learn, why do they want to learn, what will they do after learning the skill. These are very important investments that we make. Dipstick studies, baseline studies, understanding the aspirations. Continuously, this is the kind of investment we need. Otherwise, you can't tailor make a program for the community or for the people at large. You can teach what you want and what you like and what you have, but that may not what the child wants. That's very important to understand that we need to do continuous investments goes on to understanding and building the whole, understanding the community around. End of the day, the boy has to come and dutifully pay money, or the corporate has to pay some money, or the government has to pay some money to run these businesses. The since since we are in this corporate training space for many years now, a lot of industry linkages comes over investment over a period of time. You need to understand that these people after skilling have to be absorbed somewhere in a place of employment. So how do you create that unless you have linkages with the industry? The bodies like NSDC help us in creating some linkages. Body like FICCI and other industry bodies also help us to create linkages. But basically, a lot of investment goes into getting that the whole demand map from the industry side and brought to us. So that's another interest we make, and therefore, across the value chain, from getting the infrastructure set up, bringing the child to the classroom, investment in infrastructure of skill labs, training him, assessing certification, and therefore making him employable and pushing it back to the industry. Every step of the value chain requires a lot of investment, and whoever is a private equity player sitting in the audience, you should understand it's a long drawn process. By the time you make money and get the returns on money. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashi, for those 7 key points that you raised. I think I'll just turn to Tushar and just before that, just give one bit of information. You know, we have approved 82 training partners and 18 sector skill councils. So the NSSC board has approved 100 projects in less than 3 years, which is very interesting. But if you look at the amount of investment we've made in certain projects, without the Centum, because Centum project is a very unique project, but it's about from 45 rupees per person trained to 6,500 rupees per person trained. And in the last year that has gone by, the NSSC partners have done 402,505 people. And the average revenue that people have generated from the student currently is 2,500 rupees, and the highest revenue per student generated in one case was 1,50,000, and many are actually doing free programs. Only 27,000 people are doing these state government run programs. So and large partners who are doing central government run programs, so outside the NSDC numbers, have done 54,000, and out of the 54,000, those partners who've done it have got a cumulative outstanding from government exceeding 100 crores. So average turnaround time for payment is exceeding 381 days in some government programs. So I just wanted to share. Tushar, over to you.
Thanks, Dilip. I do have a presentation loaded, but I'll slightly digress and maybe come to 2 or 3 relevant slides. But I just want to start when we talk of public-private interface in the context of vocational education. You have discussed about private investments in specifically in schools and colleges in the earlier sessions in the morning, and I'm sure a lot of value would have come out of it. One of the challenges when we talk about vocational education, and I'm kind of stepping in the government shoes, is because the dynamics of our country today in terms of higher economic growth happening in certain quarters and that economy not protruding all over, so we do find that challenge, and that remains one of the challenges with the government to see how the equitable growth can happen. This is actually complementary to vocational education in a way, because industry faces a situation where you always cry, and this is across most of the industries, what we keep hearing is that we don't have enough skilled people. I mean, it's a very broad word to be used, but it is fundamentally true for most of the sectors. Which actually means that if we were to get some of these, if I can call them cross-subsidy related principles in the part of the government program, and you could then, government ideally can become a facilitator in the true sense, without the private sector calling for ITIs to be subsidized with some lower land valuations kind of a phenomena, we would actually have a situation where probably the skilled workers coming out are coming at somewhere of a low cost to the industry, and if they are coming from those areas where economic growth has not happened, that would make a lot of sense. The second is that a lot of today's government programs, and most of them are very recently are direct cash dispensation happening, into the society so that the economy can be kick-started. But again, there is a danger of absorption capacity not happening. And that again was synergetics to creation of some of these absorption capacities through this particular road, which is again of course vocational training, and this is the kind of an innovation which can be taken up. Since I continue to work in a very important area on public-private partnerships and adapting it to the social equity perspective, and a small initiative we are also doing with NSDC on banking area. So I just thought to flag this off and run my presentation very quickly in that context, and then come back to some of the suggestions which can be. It's a challenge. Probably some of the progressive states can lead them. It can follow back with some of the, as a part of the policy measure. And this is an exercise we at Yes Bank definitely are engaging with the government continuously. But we do believe it's a win-win situation because you're talking of commercially successful projects. The other thing which I must add here, and that is not a part of my presentation, is that your 2% CSR budgets. You are actually talking about a huge money which is going to come in. At least the public sector units are going to lead it initially, although private sector, may not come with that aggression. Of course, some of the progressive companies may come on board. So you are going to also have a pool of money where you can create that kind of, capacities and innovations and get the initial funding, and hopefully with my batchmate like Vishal can come in at a subsequent stage and see that, your investment, because they have fructified into good, fundamentally sound projects, it can happen. With that, I think Dilip, I'll be very quick. We do have a situation where very well known, we have a talent use gap, structural unemployment. We do believe our level of skilled workers is very less compared to other countries, but there is an anomaly here also. Even in the case of skilled workers being present, the branding and accreditation is lacking. Today, for example, you do have, for example, you look at automobile mechanics. You go to a shop which is unstructured but has very good mechanics. Probably he's not branded in that sense, although his skills are already very good. So that dichotomy also exists, and we can have further investments in the creative programs to see that apart from they being skilled, they can also be branded so that the absorption and their utility. And then comfort with the market. If your retail expands, your economy expands, people will be in the need of these. Refrigeration repair person who comes, every summers, and at least in Delhi you find, if he carries and he says, we employ such and such person in our agency, although agency may be normal, it may not be agreed to a company. If a company is there, of course company itself taking some efforts, but companies also do find challenge that where do we source that skill from. So I think there is a huge opportunity to run an existing program with already skilled people and getting them into some kind of a mode which can complement some of this. We have seen emergence of our new economy, which has created skill development and capacity building needs. We have access to knowledge, information, and the way they're utilized determines the prosperity of a community. And therefore, what Shashikant mentioned about how do you connect with the community, it has to relate well to them. We are doing a small project on cooperative tourism development and trying to institutionalize a group of homestay owners. And when we try to institutionalize these homestay owners, one of the initial capacity to build them is that give them basic trainings on etiquettes of how to welcome a guest. So that again becomes a dimension. So today we are in the process, we have taken a small pilot in a tourism sector, and we are in discussion with the government, how can you reverse integrate as a policy enabler and have a structured program so that the private sector can come seamlessly. See, mind you, the challenge here is the private sector on a standalone basis won't have the time and propensity beyond their immediate business to go into these. For a bank like us, it does make sense because most of the sectors are ultimately amenable where we would like to lend to if their good projects come in. So therefore, it is imperative that there is synergy in the forum, and I think Dilip's program is very credible in that extent that at least that plan seems to be happening. So more sectors can be added. We have recently started working in the mining sector. Again, you find beyond negative names, a lot of structural interventions, skill is required, already exists, it can be taken up further, and you have those kind of challenges which are there. We have a situation of subsistence and factory-driven growth, which is basic and adult education are the priorities with gradual development of basic skill formation, system for skilled blue-collar jobs. Investment stage comes in next, where you have secondary education, worker upgrading, and technical training becoming priorities, and finally you get to innovation where it becomes a priority with higher education along with research and development. So ultimately you do find we are in the typically a second stage of growth, and we need to move towards integrating skill development with higher education system parallelly, in terms of having this approach and our requirements of the stage of economic development which we are in. Sorry, this is not. Government typically setting up centers of excellence, strengthening skill development effort and allocation of funds for incentivizing skill development in critical areas. This is what government should do, and it is doing, at least some work in this. Formulate a task force of all stakeholders to get the course curriculum across all institutions. And I think good effort has been already introduced through NSDC already. And private sector should be a part of funding for skill development and partnering with the government in skill development initiatives and industry education institutional tie-ups. And these institutional tie-ups should have a transparent mechanism at least, because otherwise, if there is non-transparency, then a lot of questions derived at subsequent stages. Sometimes they countermine the very efficacy of the project itself, and you do find that those challenges are sometimes not really met with. We have industry can identify the skill needs and educational institutions to cater to specific needs. ITIs and private ITCs. The ITIs and ITCs needs to upgrade their courses and keep them in tune with the requirements of the industry. Introducing a practical training and internship component, and these can also integrate very well with the training the trainer modules. You need to upgrade, and sometimes sectors are very dynamic, in terms of what is happening, and technology could also be changing by the hour. So that becomes a very important component. So therefore, private sector demand-driven institutions, and many of these institutions having a similar nature. For example, if it's a hotel industry spectrum or a software industry spectrum, probably the government can then do a little bit by just providing a small forum which can be just bringing these institutions together and making it available and known in terms of a program saying that if it is this, you go there. And the government does not go beyond that. But instead of a one hotel as industry, you have 5 hotels you are called down, and you ask each one of them to dedicate their resources to see that program at least multiplies immediately. So by one Taj you integrate Morias and all many other hotels and take it forward. Same can happen with the educational institutions. A lot of universities have really grown. So, and many of them are present in many states across the country. So that holistic, vision creation in the government, along with maybe Planning Commission, maybe NSDC, some of these efforts are now the right time to, bring forward and take it forward with much greater aggression, I would say. Some examples, you have, factory training and collaboration with industry, important tie-ups between educational institutions to raise standard, particularly in rural and semi-urban areas, again connecting with the community. We did some work on practical training centers for agriculture, demonstration, high-tech agri-farm. Again, we were not the repository to bring that information, but getting the right partners in. You have a high-tech demonstration farm, roughly say 20 acres to start with 5 acres given to a company which is doing drip irrigation, which again is a demonstration of water component. But you also show if you use this technology and use it this way, get trained this way, your production goes up this much, you use this much less water. In the same farm, you have a farm improvement fertigation company which shows you aspects of fertigation, maybe a mechanization company which shows you. Again, how do I integrate them? How do I make it allocable? How can this farm become a reality in every state agricultural university? The situation is such that the universities don't know their own land statute. You talk to a vice chancellor, probably he will have some idea. And I don't mind giving an example. I belong to Uttarakhand state. You could siphon off such a big chunk and have an industrial zone created. When Tata Motors, every company running successfully. But when I asked the university that high-tech demonstration farm, we need semi-mortgageability right for 4 years in terms of some investment being done to that farm activity by agricultural companies, we were taken aback that the statute was not existing at that time. So I think these are the things where government should invest, because we are talking of the right mind industry, and this reverse integrates into, and these are highly dependent on vocational education. This is not, your drip irrigation is not a question of how much water flows. That has been researched by the company. The question is, how do you put up in your farm? So this becomes an aspect of a vocational education program, and how do you set this in? And once you do it, it's enough business for that particular entity to go forward, and he will be very happy to expand his business in that way. So I'll just come to later part. This is effort which we are doing with NSDC. Dilip last reported very pleasantly. There were some hiccups to start with, but once it has started, this is something on the banking side, trying to bring more people from other areas of the country. In this case, it is Jammu and Kashmir. so that they are trained. At least the private banks can absorb them and they can work in any part of the country as usual. And although I must say in banking there are selective programs. If you were to go through the RBI circle, you have a full-fledged program which again access becomes difficult. But there are a large amount of other banks, financial institutions which requires these kind of skill sets, and I think we are keen to see that how we can expand it much more, maybe to other states and other areas to go forward. Some of the issues by the private sector, we generally face the same problem, of quality and weak links with the industry. I think the weak link with the industry is actually the part that if industry is in a dire need of vocational education, they will invest on their own and go ahead even at a higher price. Otherwise, they won't hold it back. But if you were to bring some structure together and do that matchmaking, probably this link will become strong. And this is an expert area itself. This is an element of public-private partnership with social equity dimension on what we should work on. We have employed workers derive productivity benefits. More attention needs to be paid to inputs. Some of these points are very well known, so let me not spend too much time on this. Simulating private sector investments for skill development, and how can be done? Generically speaking, yes, we need to still remove some of the legal constraints, but I think it is fairly generic. We have specific examples on how this can be done. Economic environment of significant industrial growth. I think progressive states should take a lead, and the government should then ensure that how those progressive aspects are reverse institutionalized it as a policy measure. Again, I would say reverse integration to the policy is not happening with that pace which should. If you take a Reiki today itself, you will have a lot of successful examples. And one of the examples I gave you was cooperatives. Now, thankfully, in this budget, there is a taxation relief for cooperative institutions and structures. And these are cooperatives in the spirit of cooperation, maybe not necessarily under the Cooperatives Act. So I think this is where we need to invest right now in terms of seeing that how can the policy then further help in. Some of the institutional changes, role in providing information on quality of private training. Government cannot control the training providers, but they can certainly facilitate, give information about what type of training is available, and that getting a structured information module itself is a challenge. And I think this is, once it is done, it should be freely made available. There should be some web links or some kind of a module where, in agriculture, for example, they have a big program which largely work in isolation with the private sector. You have Kisan call centers, you can call them. But what you will get is typically, and this is I am not quoting, but I have heard from many farmers, you get the advice which is outdated, which is not ratified by one of the current practitioners of the private sector. So how can you mesh it? You have huge amount of agricultural success happening in the private sector. I have worked very much since I am compelled to say that. So this is an institutional challenge today. The vocation and all is present at the back of it. How can we make it? And this is where this can be done. So Kisan Call Center, there should be an opportunity. You can even say, okay, if you want to advise from a private sector company, you will have to give you 1 rupee or something like that, not free. But let the government program offer that as an alternative, so that itself may be a precursor to say that, okay, people value more quality information. And again, I am not saying government information is not good, but the fact is you will have a very right validation and checks which are happening, and therefore it is a huge component important component of a success. Lastly, this is my favorite slide in terms of social equity model for ground level skill enhancement. And recently, it has been also mentioned, it is the P4, which is the fourth P is considered as a people. So I think this is the model which is derived from a classic infrastructure PPP, of which reasonable success has been achieved in India. If you add the fourth component of social equity to it, this is really one of the enablers on which, and I think many of the programs are already having interpretations of these, but they should be further enhanced for most of the sectors. With that, I think broadly I'll end with this, and we are really looking forward that in terms of question, it is a win-win situation. Banking industry needs it, many more industry needs it, and we will be willing to further work with chambers and other bodies to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal. Just 3 bits of information. Under the Board of Apprenticeship Training, any industry could take up any number of interns and give them training. And if you don't want stipend, then it's unlimited. If you want stipend, you have to go through the training program. It is also applicable for not only people who are doing graduate and undergraduate, but also people who dropped out from the education system, also applicable. The challenge with the academia industry collaboration is industry wants academia to come to them sectorally, and the academia wants industry to come to them collectively. So how do you balance the two needs of people. We spent Sunday and Monday, I think, with all IIT directors, IIM directors, and the think tank, in talking about academia industry collaboration. But the two viewpoints are totally different. The sector skill councils are to do the registration and the information model going forward in the sector. So I think that is also happening. And from any legal constraints to vocational training, please let us know, because we believe that this is an unregulated space and we want it to remain there. If I can, I'm just going to change the order a bit. And, I just have about 3-4 minutes left as you were here. But if I can just, Vishal, if I can just get you before I get the others, because I just want to hear whatever little I can of your perspective. Sorry, Neil, but if I can get the...
Sure.
It's being selfish, sorry.
No, absolutely. And I'll try to be very brief, because there are only 2 or 3 thoughts that I want to share, which really summarize the deeper points I've made out here. But just for the benefit of the audience, let me put a little bit of the context as to who I represent. I am from a private equity fund. We invest in diverse industries, and education of late has been of interest to us, and we have made at least one, and probably very soon we'll be making another investment in the education sector. And so, in a sense, we are managing foreign capital. We bring FDI into the country, and so I'm speaking with respect to how an investor looks at education investing in India. And we keep joking amongst ourselves that education is a classic sector, because there's so much demand that exists, and yet this should be, because of the high demand, it should be the sector that we should all be clamoring to invest in. But for some reason or the other, which I will elaborate, it's not happening, and it's not happening as efficiently or as smartly as it should. And one of the reasons, of course, again we joke about that, is that it's over-regulated and under-governed. There are lots of regulations, and whenever the quantum of regulations increases, the investability factor decreases. So there's a bit of that inverse correlation. And I don't want to digress from the topic of the panel here, but I think there is potentially a need for simplifying regulations. I'm not talking only about the for-profit part of the regulations which investors have been talking about, but also various other aspects where a private sector should really be encouraged to make profits. It's not just restrictions, but also encouraged to make profits, because ultimately that is what is a sustainable method. But having said that, to a point where Tushar was also alluding, it is actually very ironical that in a country where where already very high unemployment exists, what we hear very often, and especially when I'm meeting with a lot of business people from various other sectors, despite the high unemployment, one of the biggest challenges in our Indian industry is lack of available talent. So, how is it that on one side people are unemployed, wanting to get employed, wanting to do whatever it takes to get a sustainable livelihood, and yet we are not able to provide them, provide our businesses skill sets. And that is where I think vocational training comes in. And given the potential out here, it is also an opportunity for people like us to be investing private money, including for tested by private equity. But I think the scope is significantly larger. We are only, we only, scratch the surface here, the limit. So what are the, just in terms of coming to the next point I want to highlight is really what are the basic 3 or 4 challenges that we see in the sector, and why, what is it that will take more private investments, and especially foreign capital, to come in this sector. Ultimately, in my opinion, training institute is as good or will attract talent only if it has a good brand name, good credibility associated with the brand name. And these things are not easy to build overnight.
various educational institutes, including vocational institutes, have really have to build this, slowly. There's no shortcut to it, and we have actually seen business models that pump in a lot of capital, expecting to scale up. They scale up very rapidly, and then 2 years later, they start shutting down. And the mistake that we have seen in some of these business models is that capital is not the main thing. It's not that you need to get real estate, open centers. The more important aspect is what is it that you're going to teach, whether it is relevant for the industry, and whether the industry is going to absorb the people that come out of the centers or not. And so scalability is an issue, certainly. Certain business models are evolving in the industry, especially technology is playing a good part and a very important role in making this sector scalable. Otherwise, the traditional business models have been very local, very regional, barring just the 3 or 4 names that we keep hearing about. There are actually very regional players and very local players. But using technology, I think that can change. So as investors, we are looking for certain business models that will bring about that change, people who can deploy technology, make their centers more scalable. And and we really do want to see the potential to actually expand into other sectors. At this point, we have seen retail, banking, financial services. Some of these, hospitality is a big sector, but a lot of the other sectors are just the demand exists there. We need to be able to find the right technology to make those business models scalable. And once we are able to do that, I think capital is not going to be a constraint at all. So, including private capital. So, that's the brief comments I wanted to make. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the session.
The opportunities which Dilip has already discussed with you, there's a whole lot of opportunities waiting. But I come from a different angle to the opportunities which are present there, and how to utilize those opportunities is a different issue altogether. Being a practitioner, if we say, yes, the opportunity is big, no issue about training. And my personal thought on this is that training is not the product that is going to give you money, or it is going to give you enough cash surpluses to run your business. I'm talking as an entrepreneur, I'm talking as a businessman. And a clear-cut vision, triple bottom line we are all talking about. Yes, agree, EBITDA is necessary, social impact is important, building your nation is important, but if you don't get return on your money or your investment, it's not going to serve purpose. No one will come to invest in a sector which will not give their money back. It's better to put your money in a 6% annual bank FDRs if you don't get back your return. If you have surplus money, you don't have any place to park, do it in a sector like education. I'm sounding too negative to it, I know that. But when we come to the vocational sector, if you see vocational in comparison to any other segment in education, is the most inviting sector as on date when we are talking. First of all, like K-12 or higher ed, there are no regulations by government. It is uncontrolled. There is no mandated policies, frameworks available, which on one hand can be a good thing for an entrepreneur to come into a business. On the other side, it can also be a problem. So there is no regulatory. Profit, that's the biggest thing in vocational. In K-12 higher ed, the profit making is not allowed as such. So you have to do a lot of gene bank to create your P&L accounts and to show your balance sheets. But in vocational, you can clearly show profits, you can clearly earn profits. So this is another big opportunity. Third thing, training can only be termed as a process to achieve your final product. And the final product is employability and not training. Please be sure about it. I've been there for last 14 years into vocational. I have never seen a company making margins or profits only by training, sheer training. I have never seen in my life. No vocational company has ever made profits. The profits which come is from technical consultancies. The profit which comes is from making people employable and then also helping them grow forward. So I will say the apostille is huge in another context. I feel what mechanical revolution did to the Europe in 50s, what oil revolution did to the Middle East in 70s, I think the manpower revolution can do it to India in the coming years. We all are aware that there is a huge shortage of manpower world over. Whether it's Europe, US, Japan, they all are graying. We know that. It's all in the newspapers, media, everywhere. India is the youngest country. So if we can create a pool, a talent pool, which can be absorbed by the industry on the globe itself, and we can officially export trained people. Officially, when I say where the governments are involved, agencies are involved, I think that's the way your training system will get successful on profit-making systems. Best part is that for your entire ideation, your entire thing, government is going to help you. They have huge schemes, they have huge money they are putting on it. I think the apostille is really great. Only one issue which I feel, after spending around 6-7 years mobilizing students from, and I think Shashi knows it better than me, only challenge in this entire business model is the person whom you want to train does not want to get trained. That's the only challenge. So if I say it's the only challenge, then you said that the entire business model, why you are talking so much about it? The customer is not ready to buy. Where is the money? Where is the customer? So why are you building all this infrastructure, these training centers, these all hoo-halla about it? Yes, it's a problem, but we all are fighting for it. And I think slowly it will take some time, but there has to be a social change to it. Until and unless the society start accepting a plumber as a graceful plumber or an electrician as a graceful electrician, it is you and me at the same time who have to accept this challenge. If I don't say my plumber as sir, and I only call him he is only a plumber, till that time this entire business model is not going to work. Whatever you can do, you cannot change people's mind by money. It has to change from within. I'm talking here, sitting here, if I don't want my daughter to be a nurse, if I don't want my son to be a plumber, then I have no right to be in this business. So we have to see to that. Government is contemplating huge mass program on educating people. Another thing is that the time you start respecting these people with the skills and the industry start paying them a premium over non-skilled people, and they find a benefit that if they spend time and their money on training, they have got an ROI of their investment of time and money by getting a premium of the job. 5,000-6,000 rupees, we have been training a lot of people. When we go to the industry, they say, okay, you send your people, they are already walk-in lined up, which we have advertised. So whoever is good, we'll take. I am sure that my guys are good, but they are already on the same platform. If they are paying 6,000 to a retail associate customer care guy, they will pay 6,000 to my guy also. So why this guy will spend 3 months in training, 6,000 rupees on training cost, and why will he spend time with us? Till the time he doesn't get 7,000 rupees in comparison to 6,000 rupees. So there are challenges, but apostille is huge, I'm again saying. The last thing, come with a lot of money to invest on it. It also need a huge patience. Please don't come to this sector expecting that in the next 3 years, 4 years, you will start getting profits. It will not happen. Education as a whole also will take time. You build schools, you build colleges, it will take time to build a brand. Please take a 10 years window in mind. Come with investments, patience, and government is there. If you bring 10 rupees, government will give you another 90. That's the ratio I'm talking about. They are ready to support, they are ready to help, but right kind of people have to come forward. Patience, right attitude towards the entire industry. You cannot come and say, after 3 years I want my money back. It will not happen. You will lose that money. So with that quote, I will still say, huge opportunity. Please think over it. And any questions and answers that we can do at a later stage. And I'm there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahid, in fact, to give us some courses. So unless we have some sort of policies or programs for these people, wherein we can able to change their mindset that they need to go for prosperity, and that can only happen if they are able to scale themselves, if they are able to pursue some skilling course, then only we can do some sort of change this pattern. Now, going ahead, I will request Mr. Neil Shastri, Senior Consultant with Yon Hewitt, to give his presentation and share his thought process.
They just play back everything that the panel has already said. I think as consultants, we sit in a privileged place because we can essentially work, and as part of our work, we of course have worked with the NSDC, like Mr. Shenoy said, and we work with other governments within India, outside. So we have the government perspective. We of course have the employer's perspective, which is finally the buyer of this talent that you build. Individual, that we are now touching because we've just launched a assessment platform, and we are actually getting in touch with each and every individual, and we are understanding what are some of the challenges that these guys face. And of course, there is the training institutions themselves. We work with them both in an advisory capacity as well as, as buyers of the talent that they produce. So essentially today what I thought we'd do is that there is a lot that's happening, but we'll take a view of what each individual is actually seeing for himself. This presentation will last you about 10 minutes, right? But this bridge that you're building is supposed to last you 10 years. The problem is that the welder who's actually welding the joint is thinking, this is my 2-hour job and this is what I need to do. And he's looking at it only from that perspective. He's not aware that this is something, the weld that he's making will have lives dependent upon it. But it's easy to say that it's his responsibility and that he needs to do it. But really, if you want the welder to take actual action, then you will need to have talent that is well trained, that is valued. Precisely the point that another panelist made, that these persons have to feel like the company is going to give them something more because they trained. They have to feel motivated. If I think I'm at a dead end and I'm a welder and I'm a welder for my life, there's nothing much that that person is looking forward to. And there has to be the right ecosystem. I'll talk about it just in a bit. We did an interesting analysis. So we're working quite extensively with the auto comp sector. And we worked with about 64 odd companies. And what we noticed is that if you look at the innovation quotient of those companies on a scale, and look at the amount of money that they actually put into training and development, into health, safety, and employee welfare practices, there is a high correlation. And when I say high correlation, it's about 0.7, which is significant when it comes to the humanities. So there is data to say that if companies are willing to invest in the training and development, and these are all blue collar workers, mind you. So these are all blue collar practices. We're not talking about the managerial practices. So it's essential that points like this need to be brought to the companies, because today the other problem is that if you look at skills development in India, does anybody recognize these images? They're really patchy. But this is from Maruti's ad campaign. Kitna mileage deti hai? Everybody wants to know what's in it for me. And so what we've tried to do on the next slide is really talk about from each of the 4 perspectives. First, we'll talk about what stakeholders want, and this comes from our interactions with each of these stakeholders. What are the challenges? And we think that there are ways forward. So from a student's perspective, and a lot of these points have been discussed, so I'm going to rush through this. There is gainful employment, and more importantly, a defined career path. Because if I am today a person who is cleaning the floor, do I know what I'm going to do 2 years from now? Do I feel like I can invest in my education? Is there a defined career path for me? From the employer's perspective, there is a shorter time to productivity that they are looking at. Because obviously when you get in a person, and these estimates can differ vastly by industry. In the IT industry, the estimate is about 45 days. In the facilities management, it's about 15 days. Right? But 15 days of productivity lost means that the company is really spending money on having an underproductive resource. More importantly, they are also spending on the training of these folks, and they need to be, and they're looking at ways and means of outsourcing. From the government's perspective, obviously they're looking at employment generation, they're looking at a geographical spread. These initiatives are pan-India in nature. Training firms, again, this has been alluded to, and the first point over there is a welcome change. This is profitable. This is supposed to be profitable. So then nobody is saying this is only with a social objective, but you have a social objective also being met. And there are phenomenal growth prospects depending upon which report you look at. It can go anywhere from a few $1 billion to a few $1 trillion, depending upon what all you include. That said, there are challenges at every level. For a student, there is no incentive to be ready. An electrician who comes to your home is going to lay 3 lines. All 3 lines, live, neutral and earth, are going to be white in color. And if there is another electrician who actually adheres to the code, there is no benefit. There is minimal wage increases. I put in money to train myself, but like the point that the panelists made, there is no increase that I see in my wage, or there is no differentiator. So why should I actually invest in my own education? From the employer's perspective, and this is something that we are hearing quite frequently, is that the training and skills that even the skills development agencies are building, and I'm not talking about the educational system, that has been panned plenty of times. We are talking about private education players. The skills and in the vocational space. But the skills and training are too generic is an input that we get time and again. If I have a person who I train for 15 days and get onto the job, but comes to me with 6 months of training, there is a certain expectation that he or she comes with, that this is what I will do. I will not clean the toilet, for example, because I have spent 6 months in training myself. There is a bigger problem that while the Maruti and the Hondas of the world actually might know about the skills programs that are being undertaken by the government, a lot of the real buyers of the talent, or the ones who are really suffering, are these smaller players who might be 100 crores. And that might be 100 crores Autocom player. And he doesn't know what or how I can tap into this entire ecosystem of skilled talent. From the government's perspective, while they are working on this, there is a fragmented mandate of ministries. Again, it's not clear who's going to be doing what, whom do I approach to do what. Even now, education is to a degree seen as a social obligation, though that perspective is changing. From the training firm's perspective, placement of students and scalability is the main issue. If we have a couple of persons who actually left our organization to start their own training ventures, one of whom with funding from NSTC. Now his point to me was, if I'm an individual entrepreneur, for me 2 crore rupees as overall revenue minus my costs is a big amount of money. But if you were running this as a firm, you're not going to be running this as a profitable business, you would never do this. So scalability beyond the point of, so it's largely single entrepreneurs who are trying to run businesses and they don't know how they're going to scale and there is no ecosystem for it. So what are we suggesting? And again, a lot of these points have been discussed. Career advancement based on skills developed. In the assessment space that we do, we've actually seen QSR restaurants which measure at every 6 months what are the skills and capabilities of an individual. And depending upon whether you're showing a significant delta, you either get a promotion or you get an increment. And that's not to say that there are so many layers. Of course there are going to be so many layers, and that happens even in other industries. The point is, a person is actually seeing the impact of training himself or doing something differently. There is a need for role models. Today, if I am somebody who started off with the vocational education, I still want to get, even if I have passed out of a polytechnic, I want to get into the second year of engineering and do my engineering and then do an MBA. There isn't a value for, there aren't, and Philippines and China and all of these countries have made great role models of persons who have started off just as front desk operators and have grown to the GM level. We need some of those case studies, we need some of that material being shared with everyone, we need those persons to be covered in the media. From the employer's perspective, a real-time access to information of talent. Again, if you look at the US, you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's not like we're so far behind. I mean, we keep collecting all of this data. We have the state level studies that are done by the NSTC. But if an employer wants to see it, they still come to us and say, can you give us a report? And we usually just point them to the NSTC website and say, look, there is already a state report. The point is that this access to this information needs to be made online. needs to be made web-enabled. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you know at a city level how many actuaries are required, for example, and what is the supply. If we have all of that data, it's just a question of putting it into the right forum. Incentives to externalize the training and development, we've already talked about CSR and how training is actually going to be taxed. There is a tax exemption that you can actually pull in for training. There needs to be from the government side a future-based outlook towards skills development. And Singapore is a small country, granted, but they do a 5 years out. We want to develop ourselves as a research and development hub. Chinese cities are doing it at a city level. They say we want to only have clean industries. Why is it that we can't do something of that kind and then specifically incentivize only those companies and then build the training ecosystem around that kind of work? Planning ecosystem for all talent at all levels. Finally, from the training firm's perspective, we think specific courses which blend technical and behavioral competencies. Today there is a ragging effect when it comes to, if you've ever seen a person who is at a supervisor level, and I do workshops for these guys, trying to speak in Hindi, my broken Hindi, and it's interesting. If you do a motivation chart for them, most of them are very high on achievement orientation, but essentially meaning that they're going to treat all of their subordinates like crap, and which obviously means that they in turn, when those subordinates become managers or supervisors, are going to treat, and I call it the ragging effect. I get ragged, so I'm going to rag my juniors, right? Which is a problem. And so you need to have a blend of both technical and behavioral competencies, and you need to have new and updated models of education. And why I say updated is, if you look at, the buzzword nowadays is MOOCs. I don't know whether you've heard of this. Massive open online courses. But brilliant tutorials did it 20 years ago. You had people sending in, you had material coming into you at a low cost. If you wanted to do something more, it was up to you and the onus was on you. So maybe we need to look at some of our discarded models, look at how we can update them and really bring them into the context of the vocational space. Finally, and this is the last slide, I promise you I have a flight to take at 6:30 as well, so I'm not going to extend this. We need differentiated approaches. We need established global standards. If you're going to look at 500 million people being trained, not all of them can be hired in India. Maybe they can, hopefully our economy will grow that much, but if you're going to export people, then you need to work with employers who actually have those kind of practices. Be it in facilities management, be it in the power sector, but make sure that you have those kind of levels already being built. There is an entire piece about the marketing and branding. Like I said, people don't know what's happening. Leveraging technology. 7 years ago when I went to Sri Lanka, and we talk about ICT technology, right? 7 years ago in Sri Lanka, they had given 2 Mbps lines to a village level. And one disabled entrepreneur had decided that he can use this for basically getting women who are in the village, semi-educated, 4th standard educated women, to actually do data tagging of images. And that's all that they did. So all that they had to do was look at the image, put in the numbers that were there on that image, and that's it. And they were getting $20 an hour. We need to look at how we are going to leverage technology in the right way, rather than keeping on saying that this is going to be about e-learning and pushing it out. Finally, we need to build an ecosystem. We work with infrastructure developers who actually are building cities. And the first question that you will have is, how many ITI graduates are there? How many engineering graduates are there? Nobody is asking you that who is going to get me that chai in the morning if my investment banker is going to be working, not chai, sir, coffee. Who's going to get me the coffee in the morning? Is Akul Chand actually there to get you the coffee? Is he there in the vicinity? Is there housing for that guy? Or is he staying with 6 other people in a room which he's paying half the rent for from his salary? The ecosystem, the investment that's required is beyond just the education piece. There is a tremendous amount of money to be made, but there are also difficulties. And it might seem from what I'm saying and what the panel is saying that this is a difficult problem that you can never solve. But then, as the wise man who all of us have enjoyed the work of actually said, it's kind of fun to do the impossible. So, thank you very much.
Finally, Mr. Neel Shastri from New York.
Word. Everybody is talking about vocational training. The country is contemplating how to get people trained as Tehsil has just mentioned. The government is trying to get the rest and not get trained. At the same time, also asking them to come and get trained. It is a very difficult situation. If you go to small villages, you go to small towns, people are getting money from Narega and they really don't want to work. That is the reality. They do not have the aspiration to touch the sky because they have not seen anything like that in their life. There's no awareness. People are not concerned about their own well-being because they have lived in a parameter which is good enough with a little bit of rice and a little bit of grain. What kind of training are we talking about? What kind of awareness are we talking about? Do these people also realize what life is all about if they get trained? That is the question. How much has the government, how many private players have reached out to them and shown them a world which is new to them, apart from what they see on silver screen, which is not Shah Rukh Khan and the film heroines, that is not life. I feel at the end of the day, they must know that life is just not what they live in. Life is not what they have seen all their, for so many years of their life. It is important to create awareness for the person to walk up and say, yes, I'm interested in getting trained, I'm interested in improving my lifestyle, and that is why I'll get trained. And the society should reach out and give them respect for the labor they are trained for. These are two very, very important things. And that is the reason why in India, people do not want to take up vocational training and get trained as they do in European countries. We don't pay them enough, we don't treat them equally, and they see no future in being trained as any plumber, electrician, so on and so forth. Having said that, we have experts on this panel, and I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Dilip Shenoy, who is not here right now, who spared his time and talked about what NSDC is doing. And also here with us, we have Mr. Sashikant, who is COO of Centum Learning Limited, Mr. Vishal Pandey, President and Country Head of Yes Bank, Mr. Zahid, of course, and of course Mr. Vishal Kapoor, Director, Avigo Capitals Private Limited, and Mr. Neil Shastri, who has told you all about what vocational training will do to the people. But all my learned friends who are sitting here, I would request you to go out and tell people how it will change their life. Thank you very much for coming and hope to see all of you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jitendra.
In fact, in the morning session, we had discussions on higher education, school education. Now again, a very, very sensitive session. The session on private investments in vocational education. In fact, when we are talking of higher education and say somewhere secondary education, we are in fact talking of only 20 Mr. Zahid to practically felicitate our families with potted plant schools.